Good morning. This is Deborah Matthews, Vicar of Verwood, with my thought for today. It's a very British thing to talk about the weather, and we are generally a polite nation, and so it's a good subject for us to pass the time of day with whenever we meet people in the street. Morning, it's good to see the sun, or what awful weather for August. They're both acceptable greetings when we're found out and about. Looking back to this time last year, we were talking about the heat wave and hosepipe bans, so it couldn't be more different this year. But we can happily say that all the rain is good for the gardens, and my tomatoes are certainly doing very well. But of course it's not so good for those on holiday here, or for parents trying to find outdoor pursuits to amuse their children. The weather is not something we can change, at least in the short term, although we can all do our small part in limiting global warming. But we are blessed that the weather in this country is usually less extreme than it is in other parts of the world. The situation this summer in other countries is dire. People are having to deal with wildfires and the devastation left in their paths. And those places and people are in all of our prayers. It doesn't matter how sophisticated the economy is, there is no protection against these dangerous conditions that take life and destroy homes and livelihoods. Today's Gospel reading takes place in the midst of a different weather condition, much more localised and less serious unless you happen to be in a small boat on the Sea of Galilee. The sea is actually a lake. It's 700 feet below sea level and surrounded by steep hills and mountains. And it is subject to sudden storms, often in the evening when it cools down, due to the different temperatures between the sea and the land. In St. Matthew's Gospel, chapter 14, verse 22 onwards, we read that Jesus, seeking some time alone, had gone up the mountain to pray, whilst he'd sent the disciples in a boat crossing to the other side of the lake. And then a storm arose. The disciples were terrified. They knew the sea and its dangers. For some time that evening they had been fighting against the wind and battered by the waves. And then Jesus came across the sea to them, and they were even more frightened because they thought he must be a ghost, and they cried out in alarm. But Jesus said to them, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." Through the sound of the wind and the waves, Peter called to him, "If it is you, command me to come to you." And Jesus said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and went towards Jesus. But when he took his eyes off Jesus, Peter began to sink, and he called out to Jesus to save him. And Jesus indeed did that. He reached out of his hand to Peter and caught him. And then Jesus said to Peter, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" Well, I imagine in that situation it would be hard not to doubt. But the main point for us from this passage is to keep looking to Jesus, particularly when we are afraid, when we feel that we are being overwhelmed by events in our lives that we can't see past. Peter and the other disciples were learning about having faith in Jesus, and we all have to keep working at our faith. It's not something that comes instantly or easily, but we should never neglect it. If we do not pay attention to it, then we will flounder when we're faced with the storms of life. trusting in Jesus helps us to build the resilience we need to be his disciples. Having faith does not mean that we're not scared or that we don't need to take the proper precautions in life. Faith is not fanciful, it is hopeful and positive and helps us to live well and to support those around us. Faith makes all the difference to the way we live and the way we cope with our disappointments and fears, and it helps us to be thankful and to celebrate our joys. When we travel in our own direction without faith, then life can be rough and frightening. When we trust in Jesus to lead us, the journey may still be rough and frightening, but we can be assured of his company to help us navigate the way forward. May God be with you through every challenge in your life and help you to trust that you are never left on your own to face your fears. God bless you and have a good week.